Good afternoon. My name's Sharon Clark. We're here today to do a presentation on the ethics behind the fire of the Grenfell Tower. This presentation was prepared by Callum Montgomery, John McCulloch, John Lees-Gardner, Kelly Gibson and myself, Sharon Clark. First of all, I'll give you some of the background to what we're going to discuss. Grenfell Tower was a 24-storey tower block, part of a council-owned estate. On the 14th of June 2017, a fridge freezer on the 4th floor caught fire. This subsequently spread through the entire tower block and led to the deaths of 72 people. Such a simple fault could never have been predicted, much less prevented. As the resulting inquiry has revealed, the fire's devastating scale could have been prevented. The council and the property manager's lack of maintenance and duty of care over the tower, the quality of the refurbishment, and the handling of the aftermath by the media and the government have all been widely criticised. The decisions made in refurbishing the tower, the lack of understanding over fire regulations on tower blocks, and the total focus on cost saving, above all else, are more responsible for those deaths than the malfunctioning fridge freezer. Residents' concerns were consistently ignored and fire safety concerns were dismissed. The primary goal was to complete the refurbishment of Grenfell as cheaply as possible. It is an ethical failing across multiple government, council and corporate levels. These principles will be highlighted and the failings will be discussed in this presentation. I'll now hand you over to John Lees-Gardner to discuss the government and their role and failings.
Thanks, Sharon. So before the Grenfell refurbishment happened, there was a change in the fire regulations that was brought in Scotland regarding flammable cladding after a fire that happened in '99. But these same regulations were not brought in England, and there was no regulation changes made regarding the installation of sprinkler systems or any other like fire escape, fire doors. No changes like that were made. And then 2011 was there was another regulation change brought in. This is where they had the change of energy efficiency regulations were brought in, which is why there was an increased demand in cladding being installed to these towers in the first place, so they met energy efficiency regulations. So there was also at that time, there was a lobby group that was set up of 10 different plastic insulation companies who petitioned the government to ensure that their products would be used as part of this installation, as opposed to like rock wool, which isn't flammable and is more energy efficient, but that's a different story. So they ensured that their flammable cladding would be chosen before to use to help meet these fire regulations. So obviously this shows a lack of existential ethics. Existential ethics is of course the focus of individuals, their issues, their viewpoints, try to figure out their place in the universe. The individuals the people that lived in the tower, their concerns, one they considered, is first of all when the refurbishment was started and things like where the school was going to be placed, for example, that was placed on the grounds of the tower, but the people who lived in the tower, they were never consulted or asked about this. And so the people who lived in the tower, they tried to have their existence, their views recognised by the council, by the government, by the property managers that are responsible for this. But their views never were considered. They were actually ignored and in some cases threatened against, because it was an action group called the Grenfell Action Group that was set up by residents of the tower who felt that health and safety priorities were not in place or not considered, and so they started a blog to try and draw attention to these things. And after they set this up, they were threatened with legal action from a lawyer who represented the council they ignored this threat, and it must have been toothless because there was no further response after that. Again, showing some disenfranchisement here. This can also be looked at from a Foucauldian perspective, because here there was basically disciplinary power that was applied to the residents to try and force or coerce their behaviour and to stop them from talking about the health and safety concerns at the tower. And of course, there's also the issue, well, the legal action was never pursued, which kind of shows it must have been just an attempt to coerce and control them. The threat of this legal action was used to stop the residents from discussing the health and safety issues in the building. The people that lived in the tower, although they were all various disenfranchised groups, migrants, people of quite low working class, disabled people who really needed help and maybe extra or special help from the government, and this help was also ignored. There's a kind of a sense, again, more Foucauldian, that they were maybe all kind of like placed in this tower as a type of control to get them like out the way as them dealt with, as part of the way of also ignoring the fire safety concerns that they had. Each person, each family that was in the tower, they had different needs, different concerns that had to be addressed. But the council that a greater ethical responsibility to consider all these additional needs of people with disabilities, migrants that come into the country, language barriers. As a result of this, we can see that the council and the government and even the property managers failed to consider a proper duty of care. In the end, we can see that the council and the property managers basically prioritised their public image and their public perception over the health and safety and the rights of those that lived in the tower. So now I'm going to pass you to John, who's going to discuss the media and utilitarianism.
Thanks, John. So I'm going to discuss mainstream media and utilitarianism, while also discussing an opposite view of the media towards the end. In total, the mainstream media is viewed as a business with a goal to maximise profit. However, they still have a moral duty to report the facts. Utilitarianism is the view that actions should be considered and judged based on the largest amount of benefits and costs it poses to society. An action is considered good if it benefits the most amount of bodies or individuals. And the theory links well-being with happiness. So an action is deemed good if it brings the most amount of pleasure to the most significant amount of people. Businesses that adopt utilitarianism may show distinctive traits. One is through the use of aggregation. Grenfell's perspective on utilitarianism suggests that the consequences of the action should not only bring happiness to an individual, but the community around him or her. A business that applies this form of utilitarianism will make decisions that will maximise profits while also simultaneously serve the best interests of the community around them. One example of this, obviously in the media, would be selling high quality newspapers with accurate reporting. So this should increase the paper's value while meeting the needs of the customers and the community at the same time. In this case, it can be seen that it was used very poorly. If we go back to the Lakenhall House fire that killed 6 people, the fire spread through the external cladding, similar to Grenfell Tower incident. And the London Fire Brigade at the inquest there warned the local councils and the government of the use of these flammable claddings, cheap claddings. The media didn't really follow up on these the way they should have. They should have kept the pressure up on the government level to get these changed. Should have kept the public aware. Since the media knew the dangers of these claddings, they had a duty to tell the greater society of these dangers and put pressure on the government in order to change them. Journalists should have been given the freedom to report freely on the issue and assign blame to the correct parties involved. If we move on to Grenfell, the media came in strongly with a lot of reactive pieces in order to sell stories, not really focusing on who should be blamed properly. In fact, they actually deflected the blame away and blamed the London Fire Brigade for the stakeout and the handling of the fire. not really addressing the issue of the claddings and the fact that the residents were ignored. Very little was followed up on after the initial blaze, and when applying utilitarianism as a theory, they should have fully reported on the failings at Lakenhall House at first, and this could have prevented Grenfell Tower ever going ablaze. If they put the pressure on the government by making the public aware of the dangers of these cheap flammable claddings, it may have been prevented. They used clickbait style articles in order to sell stories without fully reporting on the problem, and they only cared about the sales, the initial sales after the blaze, and this really demonstrated a lack of care to the residents. We're using these deflection tactics. So now this is a poor use of media and utilitarianism. However, I'm going to play a short video by the British crime rapper Stormzy. He had something to say on the issue. I'll just play the video just now.
And chemtrails, control, make sure that it ends well. Even when the brother's looking fresher than Denzel, still gonna judge him by the stuff that my friend sells. Well, all the stories that the tip of my pen tell. No fear, I'ma let the tip of my pen show. That yo, Theresa May, where's that money for Grenfell? Well, you thought we just forgot about Grenfell, you criminals. And you got the cheek to call us savages. You should do some jail time, you should pay some damages. We should burn your house down and see if you can manage this. MP Smith Cole, we just smoke a bit of cannabis. So, don't get me for this, so be woke.
So we'll now interpret the video in the following slide. As previously mentioned, the media stopped reporting on the incident, and the rapper is frustrated with the lack of help the residents have received, and that everyone seems to have moved on, including the government, and nothing is been done yet. That's where he mentions Theresa May, where's the money for Grenfell? He then goes on, you've got the cheek to call us savages. This is calling out the systematic racism within the Tory government, who always seem to, it can be seen that the Metropolitan Police, they harass a lot of black men for walking the streets. He's called this out, and he refers to himself as us and savages, and by us he means ethnic minority, black males and black groups, and even ethnic groups which were predominantly housed at Grenfell. Point 3, you should do some jail time, you should pay some damages. This is due to the building being built cheaply, using flammable claddings that killed 72 people, and despite this, no arrests were made, nor have any major laws been changed. The rapper did have an interview with music magazine NME, and he discussed his performance. He basically stated that he felt he had a responsibility as being a black man from London, and that a lot of these people represent his ethnic background. He claims that coming from the community, as I say, has a responsibility, and he stated that he was on the stage for 5 minutes, so he had something to say on the topic. This could be seen as a use of utilitarianism in the sense of this won't benefit him. He's a millionaire. It's really benefiting those in from that community by creating an awareness of the topic and really trying to hold those accountable. The people in government, the people in the councils. So that's really all I have to say on the topic. I'll now pass you on to John, who will now discuss subcontractors' rights and duties.
Thanks, John. So the property managers, KTMO, they hired various different companies to work on the refurbishment of the tower, as well as the additional work that was being done with the building of the new school, Kensington Academy. So there was the project manager, Artelia UK, the architect Studio E, who didn't have any experience in refurbishing high-rise towers. There was Ryden, who had previously refurbished a tower. They were the main construction company. As well as that, there was also at least 17 other subcontracted companies that were identified during the inquiry. And each of these companies thought that somebody else was responsible for fire safety, meaning that none of them followed fire safety. Obviously, this doesn't follow any kind of ethical standards. No shortcuts should be taken for following any kind of work that's done in a dwelling where people are going to be living. So obviously, the rights of the residents in the tower were breached because they had no say in the flammable materials that were used or any of the materials that were used in the installation. The workers had a responsibility to make sure that the building was secure and safe, but shortcuts were made purely for a profit motive. Safety regulations were just ignored. The rights and duties, but a part of that is the theory of the ethics of care, which emphasises a tangible care for the people around us. Part of ethics of care has two moral demands that everyone has some array of relationship with other people, such as the case is the workers would have some relationship with their managers, but also as well the people that lived in the building, as they were responsible for fitting the cladding. But there's also the other moral aspect that these relationships should be trusted and respected. But it's pretty clear that very little respect was given to the residents of Grenfell Tower, as they had no say in the cladding that was chosen. So the main contractor, Bryden, they clearly did not consider the consequences of choosing this flammable cladding. They also claimed during the inquiry that they relied on others to ensure fire safety. They relied on, in fact, the subcontractors for the fire safety. And considering how many subcontractors there were and how they considered that each other was responsible for fire safety, it's no wonder that this was something that was just ignored, missed. So there was a site inspector that visited who described the work as shocking and unacceptable, and also noted that there was only 8 workers on site at the time of his visit carrying out this refurbishment work on this 24-storey tower block. It's clear that neither Ryden nor any of the other subcontractors respected or followed any ethics of care from choosing either the materials or considering the rights of the people that lived in the tower. And now I'm going to pass you to Sian, who's going to talk about deontology and some more about the subcontractors.
Kant looks at morality as a duty concerning our own actions. The combustible cladding did not pass safety checks. The installation prioritised costs over safety. The installation itself is morally wrong, as it disregarded the safety of the residents. The company did not have the expertise, and they mounted the cladding in the building without consultation from a fire safety consultant. Virtue ethics, whose roots are in Kantian ethics, would have led Ryden to consider the outdated building regulations, knowing that occupants' lives were at risk. The inquiry of Grenfell Tower is an investigation into the circumstances of what led up to the fire. It was carried out by Sir Martin Moore-Bick, ordered by Prime Minister at the time, Theresa May, in 2 phases. Phase 2 is ongoing. I'm just going to talk for a minute about deontology because it's applicable. The theory of deontology can be used here because the theory looks at ethics in which the focus is on right and wrongdoing. If something is right and is morally right, then it should be done. If an action is wrong, then it should not be done. In the case of the Grenfell fire, before the cladding went onto the building, it was known that it wasn't safe to install and it didn't have the approval of a fire consultant. And the inquiry subsequently found that the leading cause of the fire spreading was due to this cladding. There are a few main points that have become known in the investigation. Firstly, it can be seen that the manufacturer of the insulation lied when launching its product. The TMO had hired architects who had never clad a high-rise build before. There was misleading marketing of the cladding material. There was secret cost-saving meetings in informal locations such as coffee shops. The combustible insulation was energy efficient and met current standards. Poor workmanship carried out during the refurbishment as well. Checks and balances weren't in place to ensure that a standard of work was adhered to. Complaints and concerns were dismissed from rebel residents. So I would have to ask, would the directors of Riding be satisfied with the flammable cladding on their home? Deontological or duty-based ethics are where you do the right thing because it's the right thing. These theories were certainly not followed by the council, the government, or the construction companies. Following these theories would have prevented the deaths of 72 people. To date, no company that was involved in the refurbishment has yet taken responsibility. Each one blames another. The cladding was to blame for the spread of the fire. It didn't comply with regulations, and the Mayor of London gave evidence saying the officials manipulated the complaints of the tenants and treated them like troublemakers. So, who's to blame? Was it Riding for completing the contract for £2.5 million less than the previous contractor quoted and for cutting corners? Was it the council for not allowing enough finance to do the job properly and for allowing the flammable materials to be used? Or the council officer who passed the cladding in 2015 and whose qualifications were dubious? Was it the regulators for not properly regulating the construction industry? Or the government for not clearly defining good building practice and allowing such a flammable material to be used at all? And also the government for allowing fire certificates to be self-policed, for cutting London Fire Brigade budget and for many other failings? Or was it London Fire Brigade for their stay put policy? As part of our presentation, we did a questionnaire that was put on social media just to get a general idea from the public and who they think was responsible for the deaths. You can see from the diagram that from a total of 56 respondents, 5 people thought the London Fire Brigade was to blame. 6 people thought the fridge freezer that started the fire was to blame. 15 thought the cladding company was to blame. The highest response was for the government to say 20 people thought that the government for scrapping the fire safety certificate and 10 people thought it was the council for lack of care. So you can see there is a diverse range of opinions as for who's actually to blame for the Grenfell Tower disaster. Now, to conclude the presentation, from its construction to its destruction, the history of Grenfell Tower is one of countless ethical issues, revealing an ongoing series of missed opportunities, lax oversight and arbitrary decisions that led to the deaths of 72 people. Decisions that continue to plague the lives of residents in numerous other tower blocks and buildings across the country. In 1946, Sartre once said, "Man is condemned to be free because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does." Everyone is accountable for their actions and the consequences of their actions. Even inaction is still a decision, and a person's refusal to take responsibility is just the refusal to accept that they are accountable. If corporations will not take responsibility for their actions, then it falls to us as individuals to hold them to account. Thank you for listening to this presentation.
Thank you for listening to the presentation.
Thanks very much for listening.